What happens when a successful CEO goes undercover and faces discrimination in his own store? Saturday morning, just after 10 a.m., Jonathan Blake adjusted the brim of his baseball cap in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable. Not the CEO who had built a multimillion-dollar retail empire, but just another face in the crowd. His plain hoodie and jeans were a far cry from the tailored suits that normally defined his days. Today wasn't about boardrooms or numbers. It was about stepping into his own world unannounced to see what it looked like through a stranger's eyes. Jonathan had always believed in the power of connection. His company had been built on the promise that every customer mattered, no matter their background. But recently, whispers of complaints had started trickling up the chain. Rumors of poor service, bias, and a lack of care from his staff. If there was truth to these claims, he needed to know. Not as the boss, but as someone experiencing it firsthand. The retail store in question sat just outside Atlanta, Georgia, in a busy suburban plaza. It wasn't the flagship location, nor was it the top-performing store in his chain, but it held significance. It was the first store Jonathan had opened outside his home state, a gamble that had paid off handsomely. He'd visited countless times in its early days, but now, years later, he couldn't help but wonder, had the warmth and inclusivity he'd envisioned stayed intact? Jonathan parked his car and took a deep breath. A rush of anticipation mixed with unease settled over him. He was about to walk into the unknown, shedding the safety net of his title to see if his values still held weight at the foundation of his business. But what Jonathan didn't know was that his commitment to uncovering the truth would lead him to a moment he'd never forget, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his own company. Jonathan stepped out of his car and into the bustling parking lot. The sun was already high, casting sharp reflections off the windshields of nearby vehicles. He adjusted the strap of his weathered canvas bag, the kind you'd see slung over the shoulder of an everyday shopper. Today, he wasn't CEO Jonathan Blake. He was just another customer, a man with a name no one needed to know. The storefront gleamed. In the sunlight, the company's logo bold and familiar. He couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as he approached the automatic doors. This was his creation, a vision turned reality. But pride quickly gave way to focus as he crossed the threshold, the cool blast of air conditioning welcoming him inside. The store hummed with activity. Shoppers pushed carts laden with goods, and children's voices rose and fell in excitement near the toy aisle. Employees in uniform moved with purpose, stocking shelves, ringing up purchases, and assisting customers. To the untrained eye, everything seemed to run like clockwork. But Jonathan wasn't here to glance over the surface. He was here to dig deeper. He paused near a display of brightly colored kitchen appliances, taking in his surroundings. A young woman in a striped uniform jacket stood nearby, chatting with a customer about product features. A stock associate rearranged items on a nearby shelf, his movements efficient but detached. And there, at the far end of the store, stood a younger man leaning against the counter of the electronics section, idly scrolling on his phone. Jonathan decided to head in that direction. He wandered through the aisles, deliberately moving at the pace of a casual shopper. He picked up a pair of headphones, turning them over in his hands as though considering a purchase. It was a simple yet telling test. Would this employee approach him? Offer assistance? A smile? Anything? Nothing came. The young man barely glanced up from his phone, let alone acknowledged his presence. Jonathan waited, giving the employee every opportunity to engage. Still nothing. He felt an uncomfortable knot begin to form in his stomach, but he wasn't ready to draw conclusions just yet. Maybe the employee was busy. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Jonathan moved on, scanning the aisles, observing interactions. He caught sight of an older woman looking for help near the home goods section. She seemed frustrated, glancing around for assistance. Before Jonathan could step in, a second employee approached her, cheerful and attentive. Relief softened the woman's features as they began to chat. It was a stark contrast to what he had just experienced. But as Jonathan turned back toward the electronics counter, determined to give the young man another chance, what happened next made it clear. This wasn't just an oversight. It was something much bigger. Jonathan returned to the electronics counter, this time holding a boxed set of Bluetooth speakers. He placed the box on the counter gently, an action that should have naturally caught someone's attention. The young employee finally looked up, his expression blank and uninterested. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear that he wasn't particularly interested in helping. Jonathan smiled, hoping to diffuse the awkward energy. "Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about these. Are they good for outdoor use?" The employee gave the box a cursory glance before shrugging. "I don't know. Probably," he said, his attention drifting back toward his phone. Jonathan blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Could you maybe check? I want to be sure before I buy them." The employee sighed heavily as if Jonathan's request was a monumental inconvenience. Without a word, he grabbed the box, flipped it over, and skimmed the back. "It says here they're weatherproof," he mumbled, handing it back without further explanation. Jonathan felt a wave of frustration rise within him, but kept his voice calm. "Okay, and do you know if they're compatible with most devices?" The employee rolled his eyes. "Look, man, all the details are right here on the box. You can read it yourself." He motioned vaguely toward the shelf. "Or pick something else. Doesn't matter to me." A heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the distant hum of the store. Jonathan could feel the tension creeping into his own posture. This wasn't just inattentiveness, it was outright dismissiveness. He glanced around, noticing other customers being treated with warmth and enthusiasm by employees. A white couple near the front was getting personalized assistance from the same young man who had helped the older woman earlier. Yet here he was, barely being acknowledged. Determined to remain composed, Jonathan decided to test the situation further. "You seem busy," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Is there someone else who might be able to help?" The employee smirked, the corners of his mouth curling with disdain. "I don't think anyone's free right now. Just figure it out, all right?" The words stung more than Jonathan expected. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was disappointed. This wasn't just a bad attitude. It was something deeper, something uglier. And it wasn't just about him. If this was how the employee treated someone he assumed was an ordinary shopper, how many others had left this store feeling the same sting of indifference? Before he could say another word, the young man turned away, grabbing his phone and walking off toward the back of the store. Jonathan stood there, rooted in place, holding the box of speakers. For a moment, he considered walking out, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He wasn't done yet. But what Jonathan didn't realize was that this moment of dismissiveness would soon expose something far more troubling about the culture he thought he had built.